The Equality Court's Judge Roland Sutherland has dismissed the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan's hate speech application against EFF leader Julius Malema. Now, for the latest on this, we cross live to our editorial contributor, Karen Morn, who's standing outside court. Karen, a very good morning to you and thanks for joining us. News just in. The Equality Court has dismissed with cost Minister Pravin Gordhan's hate speech case against the EFF leader Julius Malema. How did Judge Sutherland come to this decision?
Well, what's fascinating here, of course, is this comes less than a week after the Equality Court sitting in Pretoria dismissed a similar complaint brought against the EFF and Julius Malema by 5 journalists and the South African National Editors Forum in relation to utterances made outside the Zondo inquiry in November 2018, in which Julius Malema launched a scathing attack on a number of individuals, effectively claiming that they were part of a network of so-called white monopoly capital. He, of course, included Pravin Gordhan in that and said that he was, quote unquote, a dog of white monopoly capital, and made a number of utterances that this court was called upon to examine. And essentially what it did was looking at the provisions of the Equality Act. This court has found that though these comments are indeed hateful, offensive, and I think in some respects the judge quite scathing, saying that they were somewhat juvenile by Julius Malema. They simply did not amount to hate speech, because the definition of a hate speech is really about speech that targets a particular group, whether on the basis of race, gender, sexuality, etc., and incites direct and imminent violence against them. And that kind of hate speech falls outside of the protection of freedom of expression offered by the Constitution. Now, of course, the judgment, Judge Roland Sutherland, in this decision, saying that while these remarks might have been offensive and hateful, they were personal. They weren't targeted at a particular group. He's rejected the contention by Pravin Gordhan's lawyers that there was an implied targeting of Indian people with these utterances by Julius Malema. The judge has rejected that, and he said that effectively, while these remarks may have been offensive, they simply do not fall within the parameters of the Equality Act. He's dismissed this case, and he's dismissed it with costs.
Karen, he also says, Judge Sutherland, that Gordhan failed to bring his understandable grievances to the court. What essentially did he mean by that?
Well, essentially what he's saying is that he's failed to prove that this falls within the definitions of hate speech under the Equality Act. We have seen a number of legal actions being brought against the EFF over certain utterances. Trevor Manuel, of course, pursuing a very different trajectory, suing the EFF for defamation related to its comments about his relationship with SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, not utilizing hate speech legislation to try and accuse the party of hate speech. And of course, that application was successful. But the issue of what constitutes under a hate speech under the Equality Act is very specifically defined. You have to prove that you're being targeted because, for instance, you are a member of a particular race group, you are transgender, or you are gay, and that you are being threatened, and that you, as part of this group, are being threatened with imminent violence as a consequence of the utterances made. And the judge does not spare the EFF. He very much says that, he makes the following remarks about Malema, this argument that Gordhan advanced, that there was an imminent threat of violence against him because of Malema's language around warfare against white monopoly capital. It is plain that the allusion to loss of life by Malema is a mere example of an extravagant juvenile rant stretching hyperbole to the extreme in the course of a demonstrably demagogic speech. Its function was to proclaim the speaker, Malema, as brave and steadfast in the face of any foe, however mighty, and that the space to stand at his right hand is reserved only for the steadfast of his fellows. The imminent impression is that the is of puerile self-aggrandizement, not a threat to Pravin Gordhan or anyone else. So that's quite a scathing assessment by the judge of Julius Malema's rant, as he describes it, in front of the Zondo inquiry. But he's just saying this isn't hate speech, and I can't find in this ruling that it is.
You know, Karen, Malema has been very vocal and really had a lot of energy when it comes to pursuing Pravin Gordhan, and their relationship has really not been a great one. In fact, he made some remarks saying that once you go for Pravin, there will be casualties, and that there can even be a loss of life when he was addressing crowds. Where does this now place the relationship with the EFF, or perhaps Julius Malema and Pravin Gordhan?
Well, this is fascinating because the remarks that you just mentioned are exactly the subject matter of this particular judgment. And as I said before, the judge just saying, look, this is a metaphorical self-aggrandizement by Malema. It's the language of warfare. It's the language of politics. I mean, I think what's interesting is Julius Malema from the EFF was here, and I specifically asked him, this judge has found that your language was hateful, but that it did not amount to hate speech. Are you as a party satisfied with that definition of the kind of rhetoric that you advance during the course of your political life? And he basically said, well, the only things that matter in the judgment are, the fact that this application was dismissed with costs. But certainly there has been a sort of growing race to the bottom in terms of political rhetoric, sometimes advanced. The EFF continuing to argue that it has a right to freedom of expression under the Constitution, and essentially suggesting that the journalists, that Sanev, that Pravin Gordhan are simply oversensitive. I think there can be an argument advanced that possibly using the Equality Act and using hate speech within the parameters of its legal definition to take on the EFF over this language was perhaps not the best legal choice. There are other mechanisms, as we've seen, being advanced by, for instance, Trevor Manuel in terms of defamation action, which the EFF tried and failed to appeal. We don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to further petition or take it to the Constitutional Court. But certainly they are very well aware of the fact that their language more and more is landing them up in court. Yes, in like two of these three cases now, they have been the victors in the context of the hate speech legislation. But, one has to wonder whether or not this hurts or assists them as a party. I think they certainly will claim the victory in this matter. They will, as they've Julius Malema speaking after court, very much arguing that this proved that the EFF was correct in the way that they had taken on the so-called forces of white monopoly capital, saying that the only mechanism that these people had was the courts, but very much failing to address the fact that continuously courts are pronouncing upon the fact that they are using language that is hurtful, harmful, offensive and or hateful as part of their political language, and what that says about them as a party and their particular identity.